Hello everybody, this is TechHut, and in this video what we're going to be doing is taking a look at Ubuntu Budgie as well as Solus. Now both of these Linux distributions ship with the Budgie desktop environment at default, so I figured we'd take a look at them. This is kind of a way to compare Solus to Ubuntu to see how it performs, and spoiler alert, I was very shocked with how quick and how good Solus is at performing. But we're going to be getting to benchmarks a little bit later. For now, we're going to start off by kind of explaining what these two Linux distributions are, going over the Budgie desktop environment, and then going over the differences between the two Linux distributions, and then finally getting into some of the side-by-side speed test comparisons, as well as overall and in-depth benchmarking. So what is Ubuntu Budgie? In short, it is a flavor or fork of Ubuntu that just ships with the Budgie desktop environment by default. And being that it is based on Ubuntu, it is then based on Debian. So there's kind of a hierarchy of how things work and where different distributions pull different things from. While Solus is completely its own thing. It was made completely in-house and it has no dependencies on any other Linux distributions. Now this fact alone does add a lot of things that we will be considering, but we're going to be talking about all of this in just a little bit. For now, let's talk about the main commonality between these two Linux distributions, and that is their desktop environment, Budgie. So now we are in Budgie, the flagship desktop environment created by the Solus team. And before I dive into some of the features, I wanted to note that this, again, was written completely from scratch, but it does use a lot of the GTK code and applications, which are the tools for the GNOME desktop environment. However, they do plan on changing this to Qt to get away from GNOME. And if you do want to learn a little bit more about the difference between GTK and Qt, I did mention this a little bit more in my XFCE versus LXQT video, so go ahead and check that out after this video. So starting down here on our bottom panel, everything is organized by applets, and we'll be getting into this in just a sec, but this is your applications, this is your task icon viewer, and here you have your system tray and some other things. Starting with the icon task viewer, just works as you would expect it. If you click on an application here, it will open up said application. Closing these out, going a step over, right here you have access to all of your applications. It's a super clean, simple menu with your search. You have your standard category view as well as all applications here, and this can be accessed by just tapping on the Windows key. Now headed over here, we have our system tray. So we have access to our internet connections, our notifications, which will open that up in just a sec. Here you have your volume control, and then right here you have your options to turn off, restart, and all that good stuff. And then right here, this is one of my favorite things. This is the Raven menu. If you click on this icon, it will bring up a sidebar with various system settings. So here you could go ahead and change the volume, change your mic volume. And then right here you see an option that says no apps are currently playing audio. If you were, you could control your audio through this or control your music libraries, stop, play, skip tracks, things like that. And then over here you have your notifications panel. So this will display all the notifications that your system prompts you, and it gives you a real nice, neat way to view and organize that. Now going ahead and closing this out, we are going to dive into the Budgie settings. So if I just go ahead and open up the Budgie desktop settings, you can see here it's underwhelming, but in a good way. If you're coming from something like KDE, this might not seem like much, but it does have everything you need to kind of flavor it up and make it your own without really changing what the developers are going for. Desktop environment, you could change simple things like some of the stylizations. If you go over to desktop, you can turn off and on desktop icons and switch some other things around here. Go ahead and change your fonts. Right here you have options for your Raven menu. Under Windows you have some control over how these look, such as the button layout. If I go ahead and switch that to left, you can see it goes over there and you have more options through this. Panels, this is where you can get into some real customization. This is the panel right here, and everything is controlled by these applets. So here you could go ahead and move things around, add things. So let's say, for example, I wanted to add a skinnier top bar and have a nice kind of dock icon task list below. All I would do is get this applet, change the position to the top. You can see it moved up to the top there. And now let's go ahead and actually remove this icon task list from this panel. So I'm just going to go ahead and remove that. You can see it is now gone. Let's do something like center the clock. So if I go ahead and move this up, it is now centered. And then I could go back over to settings and actually change the size of this to make this a little bit smaller. So let's just say 30 pixels. So now I have a nice skinny top bar up here. And we could go ahead down here and click create new panel. And now we have this empty blank bottom panel here. So from here, I go ahead and choose applet, go to that icon task list, add the applet, and you can see it right there. If I go ahead and move this down, it will go ahead and center it. And then from there, if I go ahead and go to settings, I can actually make it a little bit bigger. Go down here and enable dock mode. And then you have the option so you can automatically hide it intelligently. So now it will function more like a dock, and we have this nice clean skinny menu up here. But if you truly want to learn everything about this, I do recommend installing this in a VM or even trying it out on your primary system for a while to really get a hang of it. Overall, it is a wonderful desktop environment. So now that we took a look at the desktop environment, we can talk about some of the key differences to the base of these operating systems. And the first one I will be discussing is the update structure. Like you probably know, Ubuntu uses the LTS release structure, so about every year or so they come out with a new LTS version that stays that way, and overall it's just a good time when it comes to stability. Now Solus uses their own kind of rolling release update structure where every Friday, sometimes sooner, but every Friday they will roll out updates to your system to make sure you have the latest bug fixes, the latest features. Just everything is as fresh and new as it can be. There could be cons to this, such as something that comes out, maybe it doesn't work on your hardware and it just crashes your system, but a lot of people do like this because they like to run the latest and greatest software. Now looking back at the Ubuntu update structure, one thing a lot of people really like about this is you can run old versions for a really long time. Example is Ubuntu 14.04 came out in 2014. And if you're running it to this day, you are still receiving important security updates, but there has been no big crazy updates that will affect software in any way, and it will just run smooth until that support drops eventually. If you are curious to learn more, I will have a graph right here, so you can pause the video if you want to and see Ubuntu's current update structure. And I'll have a link in the description if you'd like to learn more about Solus's update structure. Another key difference is the package managers that they use. Ubuntu uses apt or Advanced Packaging Tool. The apt command can be used to install, remove packages, update, and upgrade your system. A thing that's really good about Ubuntu and the apt structure is it is incredibly popular. There are tons of distributions based on this and use this package management tool, so there is almost a never-ending slew of software that you could go ahead and install through this. Solus, on the other hand, uses EOPKG, which is a great package manager that was developed for the official Linux distribution of the Turkish government, but Solus has adapted it and adopted it as kind of their own, and they are running with it and doing some great things. Just like with apt, you can go ahead and use the EOPKG command to install software, remove software, and update your system, as well as a few more things. If you type EOPKG help, it will give you everything that you could do with it. Now the thing that makes this a little bit different than most kind of rolling release systems is Solus actually handpicks all the software that's in it and make sure that it stays updated and that it is extremely stable for a rolling release system. As a matter of fact, if there is an application that is not in their software manager that you want to request, you actually have to put in a formal request and kind of explain to them why it's worth their time to put that application in the software center. But if something's not in there, you could always build it from source. Now, a thing that's important to note is Solus does support Flatpaks and snap packages. So if you're seeing something that's not in their official repositories, you could always just get a snap or a Flatpak for it. So those are the two primary differences between this, is the software and the package managers, as well as the update structure. So one other thing I wanted to mention real quick before we dive into benchmarking is another key difference, and that is how these two distributions come out of the box. We looked at this is the Solus desktop environment and the main default setup, and this is the default Ubuntu Bungee desktop environment. Right out of the gate, you can see some key differences, mostly with the visual appeal. They went with more of a translucent look on the panel up here, and you can see a different dock on the bottom like before. It kind of looks like what we set up near the end going over Bungie in Solus, but this is what it is by default. A key difference is instead of using a panel for this dock on the bottom, they're actually using Plank, which is the dock. It's very popular docking software. If I go to Plank preferences, you can see this here, and this is how you go ahead and change it. So it does give you some more options to kind of edit and change this around to make a more visually appealing dock. I will note that if you go or don't really pick one or two of these distributions based on the visual appeal, because like in Solus, you could go ahead and just install Plank and run it, and vice versa with this, you could just go ahead and get rid of this, put the panel on the bottom, and get back to the default Bungie look. It is the exact same, so if we go over here, we have our Raven menu just themed a little bit differently. And then if we go over here and actually search for Bungie desktop settings, you can see it's a lot of the same when it comes to the stylization. They do have different options for the theming out of the gate. Under desktop, you have all the same settings up to the Raven menu, and the panel control is also the same. And now with that said, let's go ahead and dive into some benchmarking and some side-by-side speed testing. I will note that these side-by-side tests were run on this older ThinkPad T450 with a Intel i5 processor, while the actual benchmarking tests were majority ran on the newer desktop I have with a Ryzen 7 3700X. I use this ThinkPad because it does a really good representation of the operating system side by side, and we started out with the boot speed test. We can see here that Solus booted up in 23 seconds while the Ubuntu Budgie booted up in 31 seconds. A fairly impressive advantage, and this does set a trend for what is to come. Next, we just did a simple side-by-side opening of the default file manager, and we can see that both systems are snappy, but Solus does have a clear advantage here. And with the file manager open, I got this Data Traveler 3.0 USB drive and performed a file transfer test with the USB and some large-sized files. And this test was incredibly neck to neck with a millisecond difference, both of them transferring the files at 17 seconds, calling this a tie. And next, one of the files that was transferred over was this video file, so I went ahead and opened it up, and at the exact same time you notice that there is not a difference at all. In the beginning it does look like there might be, but when the video does start playing, the two operating systems are perfectly in sync, so this is another tie. Next, I opened up Firefox, and this will be another tie as there's barely any difference in what is open first, with maybe an exception of the difference in the initial homepage that's loaded. And next we opened up GIMP, and this gave Solus an advantage of about 3 to 4 seconds over Ubuntu. And once GIMP was open, I went ahead and made a 3000 by 3000 canvas, and then rendered out a lava texture over both canvases. And this time, when the render is performed at the exact same time, we can see that the Ubuntu distribution actually won this round. So now that we took a look at that, right here I have all my results from the benchmarking. I included Manjaro in this, the Manjaro Bungie community version, just to kind of add some more competition to the mix. And I added this because I originally thought it would do really good, but it turns out this Bungie Manjaro Community Edition isn't too hot, and you'll see this in the graphs I'm about to show. Starting with the CPU benchmarking, I ran two different tests, the Linux kernel compiler as well as C-Ray. Now I'm not going to get into what these tests are, I did this more in a previous video, link in the description. Just know that these are timed tests, so the lower the score or the lower the time, the better. And you can see here that Solus did absolutely amazing with the Linux kernel compile at 72 seconds, followed up about 10 seconds behind by Ubuntu Bungie, and then about another 8 seconds behind comes Manjaro. And if we look over at C-Ray, it's a much smaller test, things are a lot closer, but Solus did come out with another victory. It's pretty clear over the other two. The other two are fairly neck and neck, but Manjaro did beat out Ubuntu Bungie by 1 second. And now I ran some render benchmarks. This is basically still CPU testing, but this is both rendering out a Kdenlive video. This was a, I believe, 10-minute 720p video rendered out at full quality in WebM format, as well as the Blender BMW 27 test. We can see in the Kdenlive render, Solus is another clear winner at 151 seconds, followed roughly 50 seconds behind by Ubuntu Bungee. This is all on 20.10 by the way, Solus 4.1 and Manjaro 20.1. And then Manjaro came in basically 100 seconds behind Solus, which is not too good. And then we have Blender BMW 27. This was pretty flat across the board, but you can see there that Solus on this one came in last, but everything here is so close, I almost want to call this all a tie. Credit to Ubuntu though, Ubuntu did render this out the quickest. The next test we ran was Compress gzip. This one, it's just like the stair steps we've been seeing earlier. It comes Solus, Ubuntu, and then Manjaro. With this one's a lot closer with just a difference of a couple seconds each, but there is a difference to show. And next we did a RAM speed test. This test was ran as a average integer, shown in megabytes per second, and this is averaging. So here we can see that Ubuntu had the fastest RAM speed. Now I will note this is incredibly zoomed in on the graph. If you zoom it all the way out, it looks like a flat tie, but I'm trying to see any differences here. And with this, you could see that Ubuntu was a winner slightly by not even 40 megabytes a second compared to Manjaro. And then we can see that Solus had a 100 megabyte per second speed difference from Ubuntu 20.10. Next, we ran Basemark Web 3.0, and this is a general benchmarking test of the web browser and web surfing performance. And here we can see that the stair step goes in the opposite direction, and this is good, well, good for Solus, because for this test, the higher score, the better. We can see that Solus came in at 558 compared to Ubuntu's 550, and then Manjaro was down there at 530. Like I said, these tests are still fairly close. I'm zooming into these graphs to try to see the differences, but Solus did pull out the victory. And now we're going to test the GPU with the superposition benchmark. You've seen this before. It just runs a animated scene going over and kind of stressing out the GPU to an extent. And I did run this on high. And here you can see the graph. We have Solus and Manjaro coming in very close, neck to neck. Solus with a very, very slight advantage. And then Ubuntu fell behind by roughly 10 or 15 points. And now we are going to get into Geekbench. Now Geekbench is a good way to just get a general score for just about everything in your system. And you can see the graph now, and I didn't even zoom in on this one so you can see the minute differences, just so you kind of see how straight across the board this is. Solus did have an advantage. It's at 8,830, and then Ubuntu 20.10 was roughly 50 points behind. And then Manjaro was only 10 points behind that when it comes to the multi-core speed test. And the single core was kind of the same with a switch between Ubuntu and Manjaro for second place. Additionally, I did run a lot of these tests on my ThinkPad T450. And you can see it's pretty straight across the board with Solus coming the lead in the RAM speed, Compress gzip, the U-Engine Valley test, as well as Geekbench. It actually came in first on the single and multi-core performance, while Ubuntu did pick up an advantage in the C-Ray and Basemark tests. So in conclusion, what we can see from this is Solus is an absolutely great distribution if you're looking for cutting edge speed, performance, anything like that, just hardware utilization. It knows what it's doing. If Solus really has everything that you need within those official repositories, you like that rolling release update structure, and you like their Bungee desktop environment, I say go for it. There are other desktop environments officially available through Solus, but I haven't tested those out yet, so I can't really say if I like or dislike them, but you could go ahead and check them out. There will be a link in the description. And if you're looking for something with a lot more software options that maybe has better long-term support, Ubuntu Bungee is a great bet. And I did include Manjaro in a lot of my benchmarking just because I wanted to see how this performed. I will note this is the community edition, so that might be why it didn't perform so well. I tested Manjaro, KDE, and GNOME, and generally Manjaro was a top performer in a lot of my other tests, so I don't really know why this fell so far behind. I did run all the tests multiple times under different situations, so I would say that these results are fairly accurate. Other than that, I do hope you have a great day. I hope you enjoy this content. If you did, let me know down below. Like the video. If you didn't, dislike it and let me know down below also. Any type of feedback is good feedback. Yeah, I hope you have a beautiful day, and goodbye.